amazing people, welcome to my channel. It's the day 9 of our book reading series, Read with RACHANA, and I'm super excited to welcome you all in this series. So, if you like my contents, if you like what I do, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button, share it to your friends who will be interested in contents like this. And so, I'm reading this awesome book, Becoming by Michelle Obama, and I am going to start the sixth part, that is the new part on today's series. So let's get into it. My dad drove me to the Princeton in the summer of 1981 across the flat highways connecting Illinois to New Jersey. But it was more than a simple father-daughter road trip. My boyfriend, David, came along for the ride. I had been invited to attend a special 3-week summer orientation program meant to close a preparation gap, giving certain incoming freshmen extra time and help settling into the college. It was unclear exactly how we were identified, what part of our admission applications had tipped the university off to the idea that we might benefit from lessons on how to read a syllabus or advanced practice navigating the pathways between campus buildings. But Craig had done it 2 years earlier, and it seemed like an opportunity. So I packed up my stuff, said goodbye to my mom, neither of us teary or sentimental, and climbed into the car. My eagerness to leave the town was fueled in part by the fact that I would spend the last couple of months working in an assembly line job, operating what was basically an industrial-sized glue gun at a small bookbinding factory in a downtown Chicago. A soul-killing routine that went on for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and served as possibly the single most reinforcing reminder that going to college was a good idea. David's mom worked at the book bindery and had helped get the two of us jobs there. We had worked shoulder to shoulder all summer, which made the whole endeavor more palatable. David was smart and gentle, a tall, good-looking guy who was 2 years older than I was. He had been first befriended Craig on the neighborhood basketball court in Rosenblum Park a few years earlier, joining pickup games that when he came to visit relatives who lived on Euclid Parkway. Eventually, he started hanging out around with me. During the school year, David went away to college out of state, which conveniently kept him from being any sort of distraction from my studies. During holiday breaks and over the summer, though, he came home to stay with his mom on the far southwest side of the city and drove over almost every day to pick me up in his car. David was easygoing and also more of an adult than any boyfriend I had had. He sat on the couch and watched ball games with my father. He joked around with Craig and made polite conversation with my mom. We went on real dates, going for what we consider upscale dinners at Red Lobster and to the movies. We fooled around and smoked pot in his car. By day at the book bindery, we glued Kant on our way into a companionable obligation, wisecracking until there was nothing left to say. Neither of us was particularly invested in the job, beyond trying to save up money for our school. I'd be leaving town soon anyway and had a little intention of ever coming back to the bookbinding plant. In a sense, I was already half departed, my mind flown off in the direction of Princeton. Which is to say that on the early August evening when our father-daughter boyfriend trio finally pulled off Route 1 and turned onto the wide leafy avenue leading to the campus, I was fully ready to get on with the things. I was ready to cart my 2 suitcases into the summer session dorm, ready to pump the hands of the other kids who would come, minority and low-income students primarily, with a few athletes mixed in. I was ready to taste the dining hall food, memorize the campus map, and conquer whatever syllabi they wanted to throw me away. I was there. I had landed. I was 17 years old and my life was underway. There was only one problem, and that was David, who, as soon as we crossed the state line from Pennsylvania, had begun to look a little doleful. As we wrestled my luggage out of the back of my dad's car, I could tell he was feeling lonely already. We had been dating for over a year. We had professed love, but it was love in the context of Euclid Avenue and Red Lobster and the basketball courts at the Rosenblum Park. It was love in the context of the place I had just left. When my father took his customary extra minute to get out of driver's seat and steady himself on his canes, David and I stood wordlessly in the docks, surveying the immaculate diamond of green lawn outside my stone fortress of a dome. It was hitting us both. I assumed that there were perhaps important things we hadn't discussed, that we had perhaps divergent views on whether this was a temporary farewell or an outright geographically induced breakup. Where were we going to visit? Write love letters? How hard were we going to work at this? David held my hands in an earnest way. It was confusing. I knew what I wanted, but couldn't find the words. I hoped that someday my feelings for a man would knock me sideways, that I would get swept in the upending, tsunami-like rush that seemed to power all the best love stories. My parents had fallen in love as strangers. My dad took my mother to her high school prom even. I knew that teenage affairs were sometime real and lasting. I wanted to believe that there was a guy who would materialize and become everything to me, who would be sexy and solid, and whose effect would be so immediate and deep that I would be willing to rearrange my priorities. It just wasn't the guy standing in front of me right now. My father finally broke the silence between me and David, saying that it was time for us to get my stop up to the dome. He would book a motel room in town for the two of them. They planned to take off the next day, headed back to Chicago. In the parking lot, I hugged my father tight. His arms had always been strong from his youthful devotion to boxing and swimming, and were now further maintained by the effort required to move around by cane. "Be good, Mitch," he said, releasing me, his face betraying no emotion other than pride. He then got into the car, kindly giving me and David some privacy, stood together on the pavement, both of us sheepish and stalling. My heart lurched with affection as he leaned in to kiss me. The part always felt good. And yet I knew that while I had my arms around a good-hearted Chicago guy who genuinely cared about me, there was also just beyond us light path leading out of the parking lot and up a slight hill towards the quiet, which would in a matter of minutes become my new context, my new world. I was nervous about living away from home for the first time, about living the only life I had ever known, but some part of me understood it was better to make a clean, quick break and not hold on to anything. The next day, David would call me at my dorm, asking if we could meet up for a quick meal or a final walk around the town before he left, and I would mumble something about how busy I was already at school, how I didn't think it would work. Our goodbye that night was for real and forever. I probably should have said it directly in the moment, but I chickened out, knowing it would hurt both to say and hear. Instead, I just let him go. It turned out there were a lot of things I had yet to learn about life, or at least life on the Princeton campus in the early 1980s. After I spent several energizing weeks as a summer student, surrounded by a few dozen other kids who seemed both accessible and familiar to me, the fall semester officially began, opening the floodgates to the student population at large. I moved my belongings into a new dorm room, or one room triple in Pine Hall, and then watched through my third floor window as several thousand mostly well students poured into the campus, carting studios and duvet sets and rack of clothes. Some kid arrived in limos. One girl bought 2 limos, stretch limos, to accommodate all her stuff. Princeton was extremely white and very male. There was no avoiding the facts. Men on campus outnumber women almost 2 to 1. Black students made up less than 9% of my freshman class. If during the orientation program we would have begun to feel some ownership of the space, we are now a glaring anomaly. Poppy seeds, poppy seeds in a ball of rice. Well, Whitney Young had been somewhat diverse. I had never been a part of predominantly white community before. I had never stood out in a crowd or a classroom because of the color of my skin. It was jarring and uncomfortable, at least at first, like being dropped into a strange new terrarium, a habitat that hadn't been built for me. As with everything, though, you learn to adapt. Some of the adjustment was easy, a relief almost. For one thing, nobody seemed much concerned about crime. Students left their rooms unlocked, their bikes casually kick-standed outside buildings, their gold earrings unattended on the sink in the dorm bathrooms. Their trust in the world seemed infinite, their forward progress in its entirely assured. For me, it was something to get used to. I'd spent years quietly guarding my possessions on the bus ride to and from Whitney Young. Walking home to Euclid Avenue in the evenings, I carried my house key wedged between two knuckles and pointed outward in case I needed to defend myself. At Princeton, it seemed the only thing I needed to be vigilant about was my studies. Everything otherwise was designed to accommodate our well-being as students. The dining hall served 5 different kinds of breakfast. There were enormous spreading oak trees to sit under an open lawn where we would throw frisbees to relieve our stress. The main library was like an old-world cathedral with high ceilings and glossy hardwood tables where we could lay out our textbooks and study in silence. We were protected, cocooned, catered to. A lot of kids, I was coming to realize, had never in their lifetimes known anything different. Attached to all of this was a new vocabulary, one I needed to master. What was a precept? What was a reading period? Nobody had explained to me the meaning of extra long paid seats on the school packing list, which meant that I bought myself 2 short bed sets and would thus spend my freshman year sleeping with my feet resting on the exposed plastic of the dorm mattress. There was an especially distinct learning curve when it came to understanding sports. I had been raised on the bedrock of football, basketball, and baseball, but it turned out that East Coast prep scholars did more. Lacrosse was a thing, field hockey was a thing, squash even was a thing. For a kid from the south side, it could be a little dizzying. Euro crew? What does that even mean? I had only one advantage, the same one I had when starting kindergarten. I was still Craig Robinson's little sister. Craig was now a junior and a top player on the varsity basketball team. He was, as he had always been, a man with fans. Even the campus security guards greeted him by name. Craig had a life, and I managed, at least partially, to slip into it. I got to know his teammates and their friends. One night I went to a dinner with him off campus at the well-appointed home of one of the basketball team's boosters. Where sitting at the dining room table, I was met by a confounding sight, a food item that, like so many other things at Princeton, required a lesson in gentility. Spiny green artichoke laid out on a white china plate. Craig had found himself a plum housing arrangement for the year, living rent-free as a caretaker in an upstairs bedroom at the Third World Center, a poorly named but well-intended offshoot of the university, with a mission to support students of color. It would be a full 20 years before the Third World Center was rechristened the Carl A. Field Center for Equality and Cultural Understanding, named for Princeton's first African American dean. The center was housed in a brick building on a corner lot on Prospect Avenue, whose prime block were dominated by the grand mansion-like stone and Tudor-style eating clubs that substituted for fraternities. The Third World Center, or TWC as most of us called it, quickly became a kind of home base for me. It hosted parties and co-op meals. There were volunteers, tutors to help with homework, and spaces just to hang out. I had made a handful of instant friends during the summer program, and many of us gravitated towards the center during our free time. Among them was Suzanne LL. Suzanne was tall and thin with thick eyebrows and luxurious dark hair that fell in a shiny wave down her back. She had been born in Nigeria and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, though her family had moved to Maryland when she was a teenager. Perhaps as a result, she seemed unhooked from any single cultural identity. People were drawn to Sujan. It was hard not to be. She had a wide open smile and a slight island lilt in her voice that became more pronounced anytime she was tired or a little drunk. She carried herself with what I think of as a Caribbean breeziness, a lightness of spirit that caused her to stand out among Preston's studious masses. She was unafraid to plunge into parties where she didn't even know a soul. Even though she was primed, she made a point of taking pottery and dance classes for the simple reason that they made her happy. Later during our sophomore year, Suzanne would take another plunge, deciding to bicker at an eating club called Cape and Gown. Bicker being a verb with a meaning particular to Princeton, signifying the social betting that goes on when clubs choose new members. I love the story Suzanne brought back from the eating club banquets and parties she went to, but I had no interest in bickering myself. I was happy with the community of Black and Latino students I had found through the TWC, content to remain at the margins of Princeton's larger social scene. Our group was small but tight. We threw parties and danced half the night. At meals, we often packed 10 or more around the table, laid back and laughing. Our dinners could stretch into hours, not unlike the long communal meals my family used to have around the table at Southside's house. I imagine that the administrators at Princeton didn't love the fact that students of color largely stuck together. The hope was that all of us would mingle in a heterogeneous harmony, deepening the quality of student life across the board. It is a worthy goal. I understand that when it comes to campus diversity, the ideal would be to achieve something resembling what's often shown on college brochures, smiling students working and socializing in neat, ethnically blended groups. But even today, with white students continuing to outnumber students of color on college campuses, the burden of assimilation is put largely on the shoulders of minority students. In my experience, it's a lot to ask. At Princeton, I needed my black friends. We provided one another relief and support. So many of us arrived at college not even aware what our disadvantages were. You learn only slowly that your new peers had been given SAT during tutoring or college caliber teaching in high school, or had gone to boarding school and thus when grappling with the difficulties of being away from home for the first time. It was like stepping on stage at your first piano recital and realizing that you had never played anything but an instrument with broken keys. Your world shifts, but you are asked to adjust and overcome, to play your music the same as everyone else. This is doable, of course. Minority and underprivileged students rise to the challenge all the time, but it takes energy. It takes energy to be the only black person in a lecture hall, or one of a few non-white people trying out for a play or joining an intramural team. It requires effort. an extra level of confidence to speak in those settings and on your presence in the room, which is why when my friends and I found one another at dinner each night, it was with some degree of relief. It's why we stayed a long time and laughed as much as we could. My two white roommates in Pine Hall were both perfectly nice, but I wasn't around the dome enough to strike up any sort of deep friendship. I didn't, in fact, have many white friends at all. In retrospect, I realized it was my fault as much as anyone's. I was cautious. I stuck to what I knew. It's hard to put into words what sometimes you pick up in the ether. The quiet, cruel nuisance of not belonging, the subtle cues that tells you not to risk anything, to find your people and just stay put. Kathy, one of my roommates, would surface in the news many years later, describing with embarrassment something that I hadn't known when we lived together. Her mother, a school teacher from New Orleans, had been so appalled that her daughter had been assigned a black roommate that she had bad badgered the university to separate us. Her mother also gave an interview confirming the story and providing more context. Having been raised in a home where the N word was a part of the family lexicon, having her grandfather who had been a sheriff and used to brag about chasing black people out of his town, she had been horrified, as she puts it, by my proximity to her daughter. All I knew at the time is that midway through our freshman year, Kathy moved out of our triple and into a single room. I'm happy to say that I had no idea why. So, hey people, I'm going to wrap it up here for today. And in today's part, I learned especially about how her journey was during the freshman year in Princeton University and what type of difficulties she had to deal being like having a different skin color. So it's quite inspiring for me. So I'm excited to continue on this part for tomorrow. So thank you so much for staying till the end, and thank you so much for supporting. It means a lot to me. I hope you are staying safe. Take care. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye. Good night.